This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 39 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast, and welcome to 2017. This is the first episode for the new year. I've had a little break over Christmas and I hope you have too. I hope in fact you've been travelling somewhere and you might like to tell me about it. Hop over to the Facebook group, just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook and tell me there where you've been. I have had a bit of a home-based holiday, but there's nothing wrong with that. I've done a lot of travel in the last few months of 2016, so it was time to have a little break. Anyway, I always find that the new year is a good time to think about the challenges and goals that you might want to face and achieve during the year. And one thing that I hear about a lot from people who want to travel some more, but have some reasons that they don't want to, is that they're afraid of some part of travelling. It might be that they're particularly fearful about certain destinations, about places that might feel that could be dangerous and might be legitimately dangerous even, or they're just nervous about getting out of their comfort zone. For example, just being in a place where you don't speak the language, or in a place where the culture is sufficiently different that you're just not sure how everyday life works. Those kind of comfort zone leaving things can be quite a challenge if you're sort of sitting at home thinking, should I go or should I just stay home? And I must confess, I often feel anxious when I'm planning a trip, especially to a place I've never been before, and especially if I'm taking my young son with me. That increases some of my fears and concerns. However, I have travelled often enough that I know it is always, always, always worth it. I have definitely never come back from a trip and regretted going. But I think it would be very easy to imagine later down the track, if I didn't go somewhere, I would definitely regret that. So, in fact, I just thought of an example. Once when I was visiting some relatives in the United States, they were quite close to Mexico, and I wanted to pop down for a day just to go to a new place, but they were fearful of it and warned me against it, and I believed them and didn't want to rock the boat, and I didn't go. And I always regret that to this day I have still not been to Mexico. So one day I will get there, and for more than a day. Anyway, so I want to talk to two great guests today about fears and freaking out before you travel and how to deal with these kind of things so that you do travel because it's so worth it. So my first guest today is Cait Flanders, and she spent 49 days last year road tripping from Canada down to North America and driving by herself to meet up with various friends. Some friends she knew, some online friends she'd never met in person. All kinds of stuff happened on this long road trip she did. And there's a few things about it that she was fearful of before she left.
No, I had never done anything like the road trip before. It's actually interesting. To be honest, I've never done much travel or much solo travel because when I was growing up, actually, I remember like when I was a teenager, that was all I would talk about. I would talk about when I graduated from high school, I wanted to go traveling. When I finished college, I wanted to go traveling, and I never did. And it was for all kinds of reasons. Like I had sort of prioritized spending on other things, which is something I've more so talked about my blog than travel. Like I eventually got into a bunch of debt, was maxed out, was sort of in this situation, where I couldn't do anything except for kind of focus on getting out of that. But it really was so interesting because once I was debt free, you then have that freedom and ability to just ask yourself, like, what do you actually want? And so then I sort of went on this other path, like embracing minimalism and getting rid of lots of my stuff and realizing that all this stuff I had wasted money on years before was not what I wanted or what would make me happy. And instead, like what I'd always wanted was to travel. And so that has become such a huge part of my budget over the last few years and I can't imagine it any other way now. Like I would much rather go on even one amazing trip like the road trip a year rather than buy anything. And so yeah, so I don't know, like I think yeah, I'd never done anything like it. I was comfortable with traveling by myself in that I've done lots of small trips by myself, and that's just sort of part of being single, wanting to go places, and not letting the fact that I'm single stop me.
Right. Yeah.
And so I've done lots of little trips, but nothing like the road trip. I didn't feel scared very often. That's sort of one thing that people have asked, and yeah, I didn't really feel that ever.
That's good.
There were, I think, a couple moments like, but this could happen literally anywhere. This could happen anywhere in Canada if I did the same kind of trip, like where, you know, one time I was getting something from my car and I was catcalled, and but then the next day catcalled again, but the guys actually stopped right beside me.
Ooh.
And you realize like there's a SUV with two guys in it. I'm one girl.
Yeah.
You just realize like, okay, I'm a little bit in a vulnerable position here. But yeah, I don't know. There weren't too many things. Oh, actually, another one was going to a very tiny gas station in eastern Colorado, and like as soon as I'd basically crossed the border into it, and realizing that there was no one else there except for one car. And as I was about to get out of my car, the guy gave me this just super creepy look, and I was like, oh, and all I'd wanted to do was get out and go to the bathroom, and I'm like, I can do that at the next one.
Hold on. Oh no! Yes, at least you weren't like on an empty tank and you had to fuel up or something.
Yeah. No.
What about as you were planning, and then like, you know, the day or two before you're going to leave? Did you freak out, or were you kind of really calm and ready to go?
Oh, I freaked out.
Oh,
I freaked out.
You're just like me.
Yeah, I cried like every day for a week, and I sometimes forget about that. Like I was so stressed out. I was so scared. But to be honest, the more like I'd be curious to hear how you felt or what you were stressed out about, because I definitely think everyone's freaking out about something different. I think for me, what I didn't realize until I left on the road trip was that it was sort of in this situation, like my parents got divorced last year, and I moved back to my hometown to basically help my family out. Mm-hmm. And I'm the eldest. I've sort of, just kind of always carried the weight of that on me. And I had this feeling like I had been home. I hadn't done much traveling in the year that I'd been home. And so I sort of felt like I was the glue holding things together. And I was so scared that when I left that things were going to fall apart. But I didn't know that that's what I was feeling until I left. And so once I'd been on the road for a couple of days and you realize everything's fine at home and I'm having an amazing time and I don't even care what's happening back there.
Yes.
then I stopped freaking out, right? Like, but and honestly, because for me to go on the road trip, I live on an island, so I had to drive onto the ferry and do. As soon as I was on the ferry going to Vancouver, I was like totally fine. But
that's hilarious. My freakouts are actually really similar. So, it was last week I went to Japan for a week, and it's only a week, but I've got a 6-year-old son, and he's quite dependent on me, and he tends to get really freaked out when I go away or, in the lead up. And so that freaks me out in turn. And I'm sure that, he'll be miserable the whole time, blah, blah, blah. And of course, as soon as I get to the airport, I feel fine and he's fine. And I've, Skype him or FaceTime him while I'm away and he's totally fine. But the few days before I leave, I'm always at the, oh my goodness, I actually can't go. I can't leave him. I can't do this trip stage. Like I always get to that point. And I've probably usually only do like one trip a year without him. And this year I've done 3. It's just the way things worked out with blogging trips and stuff. And so it's very clear to me that this is a pattern of totally freaking out in the couple of days before I go. And I know that once I go, it'll be all fine. and yet I can't stop that. So, so perhaps it's completely normal.
Yeah, most conversations that I've had about this have been very similar. And I think what's also been really nice is hearing from guys who feel the same way. So it's not just anything about, the weight we might carry as women.
Interesting.
I think, and even I think a conversation I had with Jeff Sandquist when I was in Minneapolis that was so helpful is he also just said, yeah, I was also scared when I was camping by myself. Like being by yourself is scary. Like it's okay to be scared of that. But every time you wake up either in your tent or in a hotel or a hostel or whatever, like, and you're by yourself and you're like, oh, I survived that day and night. What does the next day hold?
Yeah. And it's a very empowering feeling to do that, I think, to travel on your own and to remember that you're absolutely capable of doing that. I think that is really rejuvenating for when you get back to normal life.
Oh, yeah. And just even to, like, you take so much away from it in the moment and when you come back. But it's something I'm so excited that I'll be able to talk about this still when I'm like 60. Be like, that time when I was like 31 and I hit the road by myself for 2 months. That was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. That whole sort of expanding your comfort zone beyond, your normal daily life. I think that those are the moments in life that exactly you remember and you'll look back on in decades to come. So I want to say it's totally normal to freak out before you go traveling. I do it, Cait does it, and I have to confess, especially for Cait, because I probably made it sound when I was chatting with you, Cait, that I only freak out because I'm leaving my son behind. Of course not. I totally freak out if I'm taking him with me. I freaked out when I travelled before he was born. So depending on my destination and what the trip's all about, there's various levels of freaking out going on, but pretty much always happens. And I've learnt to live with that because otherwise, I would stay home. How awful would that be? What would I be talking about these days if I hadn't done all that travelling in the past? All right, now my next guest is Serena Star-Leonard, and from what I knew of her before this conversation, she was, to me, like a really brave traveller who will travel anywhere without a fear, without a care in the world. So the conversation we had where she confessed that, she's not completely fearless was actually really reassuring. Thank you, Serena.
It's funny, actually, like if I think back to, like at the moment we're planning our African trip and I have certain fears about certain countries in Africa. And then if I think back to before we went to Latin America, my fears I had around certain places, because of the news media.
Yes.
Tells you what these places are like. Like I was like, I'll go anywhere except Mexico City because I just heard all the stories, there's all these uncounted populations and people just go missing and you just see, all the media is bad. And we even had someone rang John and said, don't go to Mexico. And we were like, well, A, Serena's been to Mexico before. It's actually one of our favorite countries. And B, don't watch the news.
Yes, don't watch the news. That's the best advice ever. Do not watch the news.
So Mexico City, though, was on my list of places. I was like, I am concerned about going there. I thought, well, we can just skip it. We can go to other places. And we actually spent Christmas in Mexico City and had a picnic in the park. And I think we spent 2 weeks
fabulous.
there. And it was lovely. It was a lovely cosmopolitan city. We had a great time. And along the way, every place that, there were certain places that were very high in crime. Well, we arrived in Caracas. That was actually our first stop on the trip. And because we did not know anything about Venezuela when we booked our tickets. All we thought was like, Miss World is often Venezuelan. And that was the extent of my knowledge on Venezuela.
And did you feel positive about it because of the Miss World connection, or?
That's just all I knew. I really didn't know anything. I think, well, there's probably some beautiful women there, and that's all I knew. So we booked our tickets on a whim because we have been talking about going to Latin America for years, and one day we thought if we don't book our tickets, we'll never go. So we went in, and of course we just went in to see how much it would cost. And to do that, you have to pick a date and you have to pick a location. You can't just say, how much is it to go to Latin America? So they said, pick a country And we were like, have you got a map?
So many choices.
So we just went, all right, let's fly to Venezuela on this date, one-way tickets. And so they gave us the price. And then we just booked them. And you have we booked them because you've got just like that. And we thought, well, I think you've got a few weeks to kind of decide.
Right, yes. Yeah, I didn't pay for them straight away.
Exactly.
Right.
And so we thought, all right, well, let's book it and we'll go away and think about it. And we just went, okay, we gave ourselves 5 months to pack up and get ready and go.
Right.
And so we went and thought about it, and then we agreed. So we had one-way tickets to Caracas, and I think maybe because it was cheaper than some of the other places, and we only found out later why, because it's one of the most dangerous cities in the world. I think it's in the top 5 or something most dangerous cities in the world. So then we started doing our research, and that's when I went, it might not be the safest place to go initially because we don't speak the language. And then I was reading you need to get drivers to pick you up at the airport because if you go in a taxi, that they have to go through the favelas on the way out, and that they'll either pull over the taxi and then drive you off into the countryside and steal your stuff and leave you in the countryside, or the taxi is part of the crime syndicate, and they'll just drive you straight to be robbed and murdered and killed and every other possible bad thing.
Wow, sounds a cheerful way to arrive in Venezuela.
What have we done? So then I started looking for hotels and hostels and stuff, and there's not much in the budget range because we're planning to travel for 3 years. So we thought, all right, we don't want to go crazy in our first part of the travels. Also, I'm someone who plans everything to the nth degree, whereas John's very spontaneous.
Right.
And so I thought, all right, so we finally found a place in Caracas. It was in a guy's private house. He was an American guy. And even he said, look, I'll send a driver to come pick you up. It's quite dangerous otherwise. And so it's part of the deal. And we were like, okay, cool.
Good plan.
But we got there and it was quite late at night and there was no driver. And there was all these, of course, because we had this kind of terrified mindset. There was all these scary people. And our flight had been delayed in New Zealand one night, so we ended up being put up in a hotel in Auckland, and then we stopped in Argentina. So it took us about 4 days to get there. So we were quite tired. And our driver wasn't there. We didn't actually have a number to call the driver. And we were all these dodgy looking guys kind of hanging around, eyeing us up. And we were just like, whoa, we're in trouble. And the driver arrived 30 or 40 minutes later. And Caracas is hairy. Even if we think back now, even though we were so green, Caracas was a hairy place. And a lot of Venezuelans we've met have been shot or have had people they know be kidnapped.
Oh, wow.
We stayed a few days in Caracas, and then we went to Puerto Colombia on the coast. And, we went down to the beach one day to film, and a couple was hopping out of their tent, and he had this massive pistol down in front of his wife friends.
Nice.
And in the end, we had an amazing time in Venezuela. We spent 6 weeks there. But, Caracas was a hairy start.
Yeah,
and there were a few other places that we've since looked, also very dangerous cities. But what we realized was if you're not drinking and going crazy, out getting drunk, you're not putting yourself at risk.
Yes.
And you're not flashing around your gear. And there's 2 of us. We're fairly safe.
Right.
It's it really is. We've had no problems in 4.5 years. I got pickpocketed once on a day when I actually thought that I might get pickpocketed, and I lost $50 on my driver's license.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We had
massive drama.
Exactly. We had a couple of other guys on a bus who we spotted them a mile away, and we actually caught them trying to cut open the bag of the people in front of them, and then they jumped off the bus. So, that's it. That is the extent of all of our issues that we've had in 4.5 years of travel in some of the most dangerous places in the world. If you're not doing silly things, you can be unlucky, but you can be unlucky in New Zealand. You can be unlucky in Australia. I knew a guy who traveled whole world and had his pack stolen out of his car in Sydney.
Exactly right. I was just thinking exactly the same thing that, as long as you're fairly sensible, do a bit of research, don't take unnecessary risks and sort of stay aware of things, then, you'd be really unlucky to come up against something wherever you are. And sometimes when you're at home, like the same here in Australia, that's when you let your guard down, and that's when something, is just as likely to, get stolen, or you run into the wrong end of town or whatever. So these things happen everywhere, and being aware and being having done a bit of research first, perhaps even before you buy your ticket. But but I think statistically, I always think, if I stayed home, then, I could just get hit by a bus or whatever. So I might as well take the risk and get out there.
Exactly. Like, I think for us, and even reading, like, the research is not necessarily helpful, because the fear you feel is
true. Yeah.
Like, we maybe wouldn't have gone to Caracas, and that was it was a really interesting experience for us.
That's true. It's a bit like watching the news. It's a skewed perspective then, isn't it?
Exactly. So I think for us, it's my ideas now, like my fear around certain places in Africa, and I can look back and I recognize it's the same things. It's external media, or you will hear bad stories in every country, and there are bad places in every country. It's crime, and it's really just looking for, well, A, like you said, being sensible, and B, just going and experiencing it for yourself, because that's the only way really that you can experience a place. And in general, we found people to be incredibly generous and welcoming in every country we've been to, even in some of the most dangerous places in the world.
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly right. Even in a country with a higher crime rate, still 99.9% of people are basically good and honest. So there you go. Everyone gets a bit worried about something they're doing when they're going travelling, but feel the fear and do it anyway, as they say. I think most of the people in the world are good people, and bad things can happen at home as well. So take the risk. So thank you very much for listening to episode 39 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. I'd love to hear if there's a destination or a kind of travel or some kind of trip that you feel fearful of. Come over to the Facebook group, especially would be a great place to chat about it. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook group and ask to join, or you can follow the link in the show notes as well. And I would hope that wherever you were thinking of going, there'll be someone else in the group who can say, oh, I've been there and you don't need to worry because XYZ. So perhaps we can share our fears together and get over them and then hit the road. That's my goal anyway. So I'll give you a quick shout out for our guests so you can find where they are in the internet world. Cait, the lovely Cait Flanders, is now at caitflanders.com, and her Cait is CAIT. I'll leave a link in the show notes as well. And you can also listen to her along with her friend Carrie on the Budgets and Cents podcast, which I do listen to from time to time. If you're a freelancer like me, then they have a lot of useful advice, and so they're at budgetsandcents.com, link in the show notes. And Serena Star-Leonard, welcoming her back. You can find her in lots of places on the internet world, but my favourite is the Travel Kids Club at travelkidsclub.com, where they send out amazing, really informative, really interesting packages to kids to basically encourage them to love travel, but also to really help them grow a bit of a social conscience. My son loves it, and to be honest, I love the stuff too. And you can also find Serena at the in12months.com site, where it's her Retire in 12 Months project. So do get in touch and tell me anything else that springs to mind when you've listened to the podcast. You can tweet me at Amanda Kendall, use the hashtag ThoughtfulTravelPod, and all of this stuff and more is in the show notes. And for this episode, they will be at notaballerina.com/39. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you have a good new year of travels. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.
for your ears.
Who is that? Hi, Podcast.